Hi there. In this video, we will shift gears from audit evidence to audit documentation because this chapter talks about two different items. The first is the evidence under test of control and substantive procedures. The second one is the documentation. So we need to know what are their purposes or the reasons for the audit documentation, how to arrange our documentation as we finalize our field work part, and then we go back to the office to work on the working papers and then issue our audit report. So what are the purposes of the audit documentation? They work as a key principal record for all the audit procedures, the evidence collected, and the conclusion reached. The functions of the audit procedures, they help in planning the audit in supervision. They also support the audit report. So if the client or any investigation authority comes and asks the auditor about the opinion, the audit documentation will be an evidence for the reason of the audit opinion that has been issued by the auditor. It will also work in the quality control process. If somebody comes to make a review for the audit process, the audit documentation will be a good evidence for that. So the audit documentation is a very important factor in the audit process that will help the auditor, the lead auditor or the manager of the audit engagement, the audit partner, the quality control department, and any investigation authority that might come to check the audit of that client. So the audit documentation are very essential to the auditor and to anyone who comes to check the outcome of the engagement. And here is the point. Since the documentation is important, should we collect more document or less? We say it depends. So if the evidence is significant, we don't have to collect more document. But if the evidence has lack of significance or independence, then we get more documentation. If the conclusion is less apparent, is not clear, then we get more documentation. If we need to make more analysis, we get more documentation. If there is high risk or judgment, then we get more documentation. When I talk about risk here, if the client has inherent risk, control risk, detection risk, fraud risk, the more risk the auditor assesses, the more documentation that he should collect. So the amount of documentation, it depends on those factors. The content of the audit documentation has two main sections. And this is, by the way, now I will show you in the next slide. We make several folders on our computer that has a copy from all these documentation. In the past 10, 20 years ago, we used to take files to the client, but now we don't have physical files, but we put them on our laptop before we go to the client. The permanent files that we should keep as part of the audit documentation, the corporate charter, the terms of stock and bond issuance, the chart of accounts, the organization chart, the accounting manual, and so on. Those are permanent, which means in any year that we go to make audit to the client, we should keep a copy from those files with us. But the current files, they keep it changing every year. So the audit plan, it keeps it changing. So we have to keep the current files on our system for that engagement. The audit program, the minutes of meetings, working paper, current financial statements, working trial balance, adjusting entry, and journal entries. So we have two main sections of the audit documentations, permanent and current. And as I said, we keep them in folders on our computer before we go to the client. How we format the documentation, how the document looks like. First, it should have heading. It should have heading, which includes the client name, the title of the working paper, the year of the audit. we make indexing and cross-reference, where we make some notation that provide a trail from the financial statements to the audit documentation. And then we make tick marks, and we use different symbols and notation that will be next to the numbers to indicate the auditor actions that we should take for the paper. So we make tick mark for asking for more information, or getting another document, or correction. So we have different symbols. We use it in auditing. How we prepare the audit documentation? First, we have to make all the documents organized. Why? Because they will be as an evidence. Second, they are mandated by PCAOB, for example, for public company, that the auditor is required to keep those auditing paper for 7 years after audit. So it's better to organize them. So in case we get some inspection or investigation from PCAOB, 7 years ahead, we should have them ready for them. And for the private company, we keep them for 5 years. So we have to organize the audit documentation because we are going to keep them for years. The audit documentations are the property of the auditor, and the auditor is not required to give them to the client or anybody else. And the audit documentation include copy from the documents that the auditor asked the client to prepare them. So we have to organize the audit documentation for future investigation, for quality control, for better evidence that we might use it in our opinion. What is the hierarchy here? We start by the financial statements, which I show it here in this figure as the top. And from the financial statements, we go to the trial balance. So here we take the trial balance. So we take the amount from the financial statements, check it against the trial balance, and then we go to the lead schedule of each account. So from the trial balance, we take the lead schedule of the cash, then receivables, then inventory, and so on, and then to the sub lead or the sub schedule. And then we get variance and analytics with reasoning. So here we have to confirm and check. So this is the way, by the way, we arrange the audit documentation. And we keep going here. We make test of details, sampling, and each work paper individually. So the way we organize the audit papers, it has to be consistent to help us getting the information for this audit and for future investigation. And we make referencing here to help us identify any relationship between the financial statements and the trial balance. So we try to make some marks and symbols here to reference the information between the different accounts and the financial statements. The last point in the audit documentations, the responsibility or the duty of the auditor. He has to file and keep the working papers, as I said, for 5 years for private companies, 7 years for public company. Make the checklist of all the documents to be obtained and maintained, index the documents and the working paper, make serial numbering and good numbering system for the working paper, summarize the finding and writing of query. Discuss the documentation with the senior on any matters of importance. So this is usually happens in the audit office between the lead of the audit engagement and the audit partner. And then if there is any questions, he will shoot it to the partner and try to get some replies for that. The importance of the working paper to be signed, dated, approved by the relevant level of audit staff, and then depicting the client name, the file number, the accounting period. Make sure that the audit documentation is clear, reviewed, reserved by the audit lead for future investigation. So this is in brief the summary of the audit documentation. Remember in this chapter that we have audit evidence and audit documentations. I hope you find my videos useful for you to give you more insights about those two different areas in the audit process. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.